Welcome to Let's Be Well Together podcast. We're your wellness check-in team. Join us each week or when you can. We enjoy exploring wellness concepts and reminding you to make time for wellness.
This is episode 130.
We hope our territorial acknowledgement improves allyship with Indigenous people within a reconciliation process. We're on the Haldeman Tract, located on the traditional territories of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We acknowledge the presence and traditional knowledge, laws, and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land. It's another week of Let's Be Well Together podcast, and I'm excited because we have a new co-host. Welcome, Riley Thompson.
Hi, John. I'm so excited to finally be here.
Some of you will remember Riley. She did a really great interview about empathy for prisoners, and I learned something really good in that interview. I've done a lot of thinking and work on things like punishment theory and thinking about why people are in prison and how they should be treated, I think with respect. But Riley, you pointed out something I hadn't really put in that context before, because usually that conversation is we should treat prisoners in a certain way for their reasons, right? And then kind of the pushback is, well, what about victims? What about other things? And you made a really good point. Well, I'm thinking of society in general. Like, how do we have an operating and safe society? It probably has something to do with prisoners coming out of prison in a way where they can contribute, as opposed to where it's still a threat or a danger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
And then we had a few other conversations and we realized we connected, and I'm always looking for people to have great conversations with. So let's start having some. And today we picked a quote from Carl Jung to talk about, and kind of we both realized we don't really know how to make sense of it, but we both are really intrigued by it. And the quote is, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." So where do you start with that?
I mean, mad respect to Carl Jung. He's a man I've been studying for years in my undergrad. I really admire the work that he's done. However, I don't fully understand what he's trying to get at here. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves.
I have all these different neuroses. So there's two ways to take this. One is what I call kind of the neuroses, and the other is just things that bug me about people. And my neuroses a lot relate to sound. I have a problem if I hear people eating too loud or certain kind of crunching sounds. I don't know, there's just a lot of different sounds that it's almost like fingernails on a chalkboard for me. And that's challenging, right? Because I might be going to a business meeting or a lunch where people are eating nacho chips. And it's also funny because if I'm eating at the same time, it doesn't bother me so much. But if someone else is eating and I'm not eating, so I'm thinking, I don't know, what does that say about me? Like, why did I derive that? I'm not sure where to go.
It makes you wonder about Pavlov, if he was right. Maybe somehow you were conditioned to become aversive to that stimulus, if I'm going to get all scientific on you. Like you said earlier, before we started recording, if something happened in your past that somehow triggered that kind of response to people eating, or
it is possible.
Where did it come from, right? It just makes you ask all kinds of other questions that we can't seem to find the answer to.
Yeah, and I know you took it in a bit of a different direction. We'll turn to that. But for some people who haven't heard of Pavlov, he did experiments, I think, with dogs, and he could make them salivate by showing them food or just before giving them food. So basically, he would repeat something. Ring
a bell.
Ring a bell.
So eventually, the dogs would salivate by hearing the bell, and they would expect food because they were conditioned to believe that food would come upon hearing the bell.
And I actually have thought of one possible reason that connects with this, and it sounds kind of strange, but when I grew up, I was a family of 5, and we had a small kitchen table. It was almost like a picnic table, and it had the benches, and I had to sit in the middle between two people, and I always felt trapped. Like I was sitting there, I always felt trapped, and people are eating. So I have tried to get an understanding of myself, and that's one that kind of, when you mentioned kind of Pavlov, maybe that's what was conditioning me, just that feeling of discomfort when I heard people eat, and not even knowing it when I hear it. Maybe it throws me back into that time in my life again.
I mean, kind of in the same vein, I was telling you earlier before we started recording that my dad deals with similar problems. You know, often at the dinner table, we have almost always music playing in the background, whether from the TV or from the
Right.
speaker, always music in the background because we can't, as a family, eat in silence. It's just too, I hate to use the word triggering, but it's just too triggering for now my dad and myself because it almost seems like it's hereditary. Like over the years, as he's been so conscious of us eating too loud, now I've internalized how loud people eat, and now it's the same thing. I can't deal with it. And I feel like somehow it's been passed down. It sounds ridiculous, but maybe that's possible.
Yeah.
Over the
And
years, sharing meals with the same four people.
who knows? That's funny too, because I always have to turn music on. Sheila doesn't need music, but I go downstairs in the morning, I turn music on. We go sit down for dinner, I turn music on. We go sit down for lunch, I turn music on. And by the way, I got lots of cool Spotify playlists that I made. But okay, but now you took things in a bit of a different direction. You were saying that, your spin on this quote is just recognizing that there's things that irritate you, help you either self-reflect or notice something.
Yeah, I feel like that's even if it's not a full understanding of why it happens, as we were just talking about, at least you understand that that's how you respond in that certain situation. You understand, you know what to expect, like what you were saying. If you go into an office and there's nachos on the table, okay, you're mentally preparing for how you know you're going to react to people chewing those nachos versus walking into that same room and sitting down and then suddenly just being so agitated and uncomfortable and not really knowing why. I feel like that's a step towards understanding, even if it's not complete, if that makes sense.
It does. It makes a lot of sense because now I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction. There's personality traits that kind of bug me. And so, for example, there's some people that just don't listen to anything you're saying, right? So you're talking to them. And I really think active listening, hearing what people say and responding to that, that's all kind of important to me in terms of how I carry on conversations. So, if I go over to talk to somebody and they had something they want to say, and it doesn't matter what you say, they're going to say what they say. That's, I find irritating too. And coming back to your point, at least I now don't attribute all the bad stuff to them, right? So I think to myself, okay, John, that irritates you. So you're going to get triggered and you're probably going to think something negative about that person, but it's not them. They're just living their normal life. Regular people eat nachos and have things to talk about that you're not interested in talking about. And that's not negative. So don't read bad stuff into what they're doing just because it's an irritant. So maybe it helps that way.
It could also go both ways, right? If you have almost too much understanding of, okay, I'm going to get irritated. Okay. Like don't think negatively of them. It could almost come back on you and say, okay, well, what kind of person does that make me if these simple things bother me, right? And I'm sure everyone's been there. And there's two ends of the extreme, right?
It's definitely embarrassing. And that's another side to it though, too. Like the mere fact that things like that are out of my control, because I like to be in control. I don't like anything that puts me out of control. And especially if, for example, let's say I'm in a court hearing or wherever where I really need to focus, the idea that somebody else could affect my ability to do things the right way by knowing my irritants and poking at them. I hate that, but I still can't stop it.
Yeah, no, it's not a good feeling.
No, maybe that point is a good one that you're making, which is be aware so that maybe you can't be in total control, but you also don't lose control because it's going to irritate you and you kind of hang in there.
Something to keep in mind, I suppose.
Okay, well, we don't always figure out these quotes and know exactly what they're saying, but this one was a good one. It had both of us thinking. And who knows, maybe we can come back and revisit it in a year from now and maybe we'll have figured a little more out. What do you think?
I think that would be cool. See if we have a come to Jesus moment by then.
Okay. Guests are giving their time, expanding our minds. Today's interview is in the categories of economic and social wellness. We are chatting with Erin Farrell about pro bono law, a way for lawyers to contribute and give back to the community. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, John.
Originally from Newfoundland, Erin Farrell is a partner in Gowling WLG's Toronto office, practicing in the firm's advocacy department. Prior to pursuing a career in law, she conducted genetics research in California, at a large pharmaceutical company. For the past few years, Erin has been chair of Gowling's pro bono program, helping Gowling lawyers across the country do pro bono work in their communities. So Erin, for some people, pro bono work is a new concept, and others know it's a way for lawyers to provide services to client at no cost to the clients. How would you describe it?
Thanks, John. So yeah, I think that captures it well. It is legal work, so it's not general volunteerism, for example. Many of us volunteer on boards or do work for charities that is of a non-legal nature, and that's not pro bono work. Pro bono work is actual legal services, in my view, for marginalized or disadvantaged people, nonprofits or charities, and then sometimes acting on matters of public good, going to the courts of appeal and Supreme Court on matters that affect day-to-day Canadian lives.
And why do people and companies, entities, why do they need pro bono legal services?
I mean, I don't need to tell you how expensive it is to engage a lawyer. I don't think I'd be able to afford many of the legal services on offer, including my own out there today. It's just the cost of litigating a matter or taking a matter through the courts is just grown exponentially. I mean, you think of a simple matter that you were dealing with years ago, you might have 10 or 15 documents, and, the cost of litigation would cost some small amount in relation to those documents. And now even a small litigation matter, for example, would have thousands of documents because of the way we use technology and the way we communicate. So that's just one example, but I think, there are cost barriers to accessing legal services, and there are also comprehension barriers and other obstacles that prevent people from being able to access some basic legal advice. And so I think there's a big demand out there, and we're only scratching the surface with our pro bono services.
You're so right. A lot of times outside of work, because I'm a litigation lawyer as well, and quite accustomed to the very high cost of litigation. It's part of every conversation with a client before they start a claim, when they get sued. And when people outside ask me, oh, maybe I should do this, I have this principle, this person did this. And when I start explaining to them how costly the system is, it almost seems unworkable. And that's a situation where they're just thinking about something. So if you're actually caught up in a situation and you really need legal advice, it's really cost prohibitive for so many people. So I can see that.
Yeah, and I would say it's interesting. So I volunteer fairly regularly for the Pro Bono Ontario Free Legal Advice Hotline. And actually so much of the importance of that service is preventing people, I think, from getting to the courts. I mean, I think if somebody calls and says, can I have advice about how to file this claim? I always try to stand back and say, tell me what the claim is about, and should you really be filing a claim? So much of the things like fights between neighbors is an example that comes up all the time, or fights with family members. You sort of have to kind of take off your legal analysis hat and say, okay, maybe there's a cause of action here, and say, you're living in this house, and your wellness and your ability to sort of live a comfortable, happy life, like could you try to resolve this through a discussion and avoid going to the courts at all? I mean, anyway, I feel like half of the advice I give is to not sue, even if you technically could.
That's great advice. And I'm glad you said that. Like, just by coincidence, I happened to be looking at the rules of professional conduct from the Law Society of Ontario the other day. I did notice that there's a section that's encouraging to settle, so it's one of the jobs of a lawyer. So it's good to hear that people are getting that tip before they start the process going. Can you give us a couple examples of the kind of people this helps, pro bono services?
Sure. I mean, I think some of the more obvious examples of pro bono services I've been involved with, or seeing lawyers at my firm get involved with, are, fighting for disability benefits for disadvantaged folks, families living with disabilities. They might be denied or have benefits clawed back. And so we help file appeals on behalf of those families in order to help get cash in their hands so that they can build ramps or hire care workers and things like that. We also, big matters that Gowlings and other firms have worked on, and other individuals, is helping people escape Afghanistan and the Taliban. Our lawyers in Ottawa have helped many educated women, for example, escape Afghanistan, and that involves negotiations with governments and all sorts of paperwork and discussions. We regularly help Indigenous folks understand their rights, for example, fishing-related rights, and enforce those rights. Some of the small matters we do, as simple as commissioning a document for somebody trying to change their gender markers, a really small commitment, but something that can be really impactful for somebody. And then the last example I'll give of a group of people that we've helped. One of our lawyers in Toronto, Chris Hummel, recently launched a constitutional challenge of the anti-panhandling legislation. And so these tickets would accumulate with people panhandling in various places throughout Ontario, and tens of thousands of dollars of fines are owed. And when those people are then trying to get work and trying to get housing, those tickets become real obstacles. And so, that's a perfect example of like these panhandlers aren't future clients of the firm. I think it's just, the right thing to do. And I think Chris was really successful in striking down important parts of the panhandling legislation that help people who are housing challenged.
And you talk to some of the lawyers who are helping, and you're one of them too. Why do lawyers do this work in this context, not just at Gowling, but outside Gowling?
For sure. I think it's increasingly become a part of what we look for in terms of having a successful career. We went to law school because we wanted to do interesting, challenging work in many cases. And, many of our paying clients are great corporate citizens who want to do the right thing in whatever circumstance. But I think it gives some of our professionals a sense of balance when they can, act for banks and insurance companies and do what maybe isn't always considered God's work, but on the side also, use their brain and use the resources of the firm to help, like I said, panhandlers or those experiencing hardship in one way or the other. I think that, as lawyers, we're very privileged, and I think it's our professional responsibility to give back. But I do think it's becoming more important to junior lawyers. It helps them see themselves long-term at a law firm when they are encouraged to do this kind of work in their communities.
And what about you? What do you personally get out of it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have been leading the program at Gowlings for a couple of years. And for the first 10 years, I was, answering phone calls more often than not on the hotline or representing small clients at the Human Rights Tribunal. I think it gives you a sense of accomplishment at the end of the day and a sense of you're doing the right thing. And, you have files you can talk to your parents about sometimes so that they can feel good about what you're doing. So I think for me, it is that sense of professional accomplishment, and professional balance.
What about the firm? So if we switch gears and look at the firm's perspective, firms need to make money, do well. Why do they encourage, not only but encourage their lawyers to do pro bono work?
Yeah, I actually don't have a sense for how many firms really give full credit for pro bono work. It's not something we talk. Gowling's program is longstanding, and I'm not sure that we've done a great job of advertising it as that. But, we give full firm credit for pro bono hours and approved pro bono matters. It reminds me of, a firm saying, we'll give you unlimited vacation, but good luck taking unlimited vacation. Right. A firm that says, you can do all the pro bono you want, but P.S., it's not coming out of your billable target. It's not really that supportive in the end. I think Gowlings has always thought it was the right thing to do, or for as long as I've been around. But I do think increasingly it's played a bigger role in the recruitment and retention of lawyers. I don't think it's like a business case. Like we recently had a new CEO take over, and he was a business lawyer instead of a litigator. And I remember the first time I sat down with Steve McCursey and, he wanted to talk about pro bono. I thought I had to make the business case for pro bono. But all he really wanted to know is like, who are we helping? And is this important to our people? How do we use this to build community within the firm, across offices? Some of my favorite pro bono files are ones where we get to work in other cities, or like with lawyers in other cities and across offices, or even work with clients, but like not in a strategic way, but genuinely just trying to reach more communities. It is important to many of our clients, but they don't have the resources we have in terms of assistants that know how to serve and receive documents. Sometimes their insurance doesn't allow them to do pro bono work in an easy way. So sometimes they look to us to help them do pro bono work, and it's difficult, but when we can find opportunities, it's really magical.
It makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of it in that perspective, but sometimes it's not a matter of justifying things, especially from a business perspective, but it feels right. It's the culture. And a lot of firms have it, luckily, and are giving back. And the other thing I hadn't thought about, but makes a lot of sense, is for up and coming lawyers, a generation that has a different perspective on things. I can see how this would encourage them and feel good and help them see things long term. So these are all things I hadn't thought of. And what about the people who receive this work? So imagine, obviously sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, but still the people who are getting the benefit of these pro bono services, what are some of the things you hear from them when the case is over?
I think most of the notes that come across my desk are, a tremendous source of relief for them to have somebody else, especially if you're talking about the types of families who are dealing with disabled children or other real hardships for which like the legal issues are kind of a side issue, they're just so happy that they don't have to keep track of deadlines, and they know somebody else has got their eye on the ball, and somebody qualified and capable are watching, for filing deadlines and things like that. I think mostly it's that tremendous sense of relief, the outcome to be finished with the litigation or whatever it is that they're dealing with. I think they really like to have it behind them and to know that they had somebody in their corner during the tough time.
Were they surprised to find out that pro bono was something that was available?
It's interesting because we've started to, I think now, for example, my name has a pro bono like tag on it on the firm's website. For the clients, the pro bono clients that come to us through intermediaries like Pro Bono Ontario or Autism Ontario or other organizations, I don't see that sense of surprise. I only see the sense of relief after the fact. But I would say I do get the converse fairly regularly. So now that, Pro Bono Chair is on my profile on the firm website, I think I disappoint people when they just think they can call me up and automatically qualify for our services. And of course, we do thousands of hours per year, but we certainly can't take every mandate. Somebody may have a very legitimate legal issue that they need help with, and we just can't help everybody. It's frustrating, but it's just the way it is.
So if you had somebody, let's say anywhere in Canada, so not just Ontario, if they wanted to try and look into the availability of pro bono law, what are some like general things that they can either search for on the internet or look for to try and get connected with somebody?
There's no centralized organization that I'm aware of. I do know for big nonprofits and charities, there are sometimes clearinghouses that sort of collect opportunities. I know Thomson Reuters has a big one. We get their emails and you actually bid on the work. It's a good organized system and the legal issues are well thought through by the time they get to you. For general people looking for pro bono legal services, I don't know that there's a centralized way to do that. In Ontario, certainly Pro Bono Ontario and the Free Legal Advice Hotline is a great first step. If it's a civil matter, I should say, there are other opportunities or other pro bono services for those dealing with the family system and the criminal system. I'm just not familiar with those. But I think for civil issues that aren't captured by big government programs, Pro Bono Ontario is not a bad step, but I do know they get 10 times as many calls as they're able to answer. And I'm sure they're only able to actually assist some subset of those people whose calls they're even able to accept. But, you don't know until you ask. And I think it doesn't hurt to ask around and to get referrals and see what's out there.
Yeah. And people can at least try, look on the internet, do some searches. Pro Bono is PRO and then BONO. So have a look around and see if you can find something in your community. Talk to people. If you know a lawyer, ask a lawyer. At least you can find out if you do qualify and if maybe you can get some help. In a short interview, we just barely touch on the subjects, but thanks. I think you gave a really great overview, Erin. And so now I'm going to turn to the question we ask every guest. And we do that in a context where we all have areas of wellness that are important to us, but not enough time to focus on all of them at any given time. So we do a mini wellness check-in. So Erin, are you currently neglecting an area of wellness in your life? And if so, can you think of even one thing you could do to foster wellness in that area?
So, I can see on the screen behind you a sort of list of categories of wellness, which is really helpful. The one that jumps out at me as being hugely lacking, I would say, is spiritual. So I went through a tough time a few years ago and found myself kind of immersed in yoga and even spending time in nature. I don't mean church spiritual, but sort of connecting with the environment and the world around you and being reflective and things like that. And I have to say in the last year or so, I have completely thrown that aspect of what I thought was my good practices by the wayside. So I would say spiritual.
I'm like you too. Like to me, it's not religious. It has to do with connecting to things outside of ourselves, those kind of things. And I like those activities too. I did yoga for a long time and then stopped. I haven't done it in a long time, but for sure, getting out and going for a walk in nature is a good one for me. For me too, being by the water. For some reason, if I'm by, especially like a lake where the waves are kind of rolling in, it has this amazing feeling for me. So hopefully you can find a way to get that back into your schedule. And thanks again for your time to explain a little bit about pro bono law to us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
We love our listeners and thanks for joining us. Please help spread the word about Let's Be Well Together podcast. Follow us and rate us on Spotify, Apple, Google, or your favorite podcast platform. Follow us on Instagram at lets.be.well.together and let your friends know about us. It's me. Am I?
Yeah. Just let me say, flip side of the coin.
All right. I want to talk about something that you talked about, Sheila, when you came home from work one day. I guess it was something that you heard or something that happened. And I think these are the words you used, and something to the effect that you saw a gentleman who wasn't following the social construct. Or is that just my interpretation of what you said?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, let me tell you where I heard it. So
that's how my mind works.
I know.
Somebody says something, I'm like, what they mean is that a person did not follow the social construct.
Exactly. So we were in Prague, actually. We were at the airport and people were like rushing and not going during their like section 4 is supposed to go section 2. And this lawyer who's, I don't understand why people think that they're above the social construct. And I just thought that is hilarious. Like I love it. I love the word social construct because that's exactly what it is, right? We set rules to make things more livable for everyone, you know, instead of being like, oh, that guy thinks he's so important or all these other things. And I was like, yeah, why can't we follow the social constructs? Like it's to help everyone. It makes life easier. It makes it more fun for everyone. But people just don't
Canadians are pretty good at it, but I don't know. Like, it's interesting. It seems like people from different countries also act differently. Like when you're at the airport, a lot of times what you're talking about is they call it zones, right? So zone 1 and then zone 2. But there's always these people who are like panicking. Like if they don't get on the plane immediately, they're not going to get their seat. And it's so frustrating because they just get in the way and they slow us all down.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly it. And it's not a rush. Everyone has to get on the plane. We can't go until everyone gets on the plane. So let's all just follow the rules and get on when we're supposed to because you slow down the line if you get on before you're supposed to. And then we have to wait for you to put your luggage on, get in your seat and yada, yada. But like, it's just everything. But when it comes to different countries, like people do things differently. So that I did find when I was traveling that, you know, sometimes you're kind of like, what's going on? Like, for example, here in Canada, we don't bother people when they're shopping. We ask them if they need help. If you need help, come and get me. That's it. But when we're in India, it was impolite for them not to harass us and try and like it's part of their culture to really push and to be aggressive and try and sell. And they said that it's actually impolite to ignore you. Where I was like, please just ignore me.
The one that I've been joking about for my whole life, I watched a movie a long time ago called Midnight Express, which I don't really recommend because it's pretty intense.
Okay.
But a guy ends up in a prison in somewhere like, I don't know, Istanbul or something.
Oh, okay.
And at one point, they're in their time where they could go for a walk. They only had this small area and they all walked around a certain direction.
Oh. And
then he kind of freaked out one day and was going the wrong way.
Okay.
And so they said that was communist.
Oh.
Right. So in our country, like for the most part, if you're on a sidewalk, you walk on the right.
Yeah.
Like you stay on the right. So that it makes life so much easier when there's somebody coming towards you if you both just go to the right.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're doing this little dance, right?
Yeah.
Dance.
You going this way, I'm going that way. Yeah.
And so as a joke, and only as a joke, if anyone started coming down on the wrong side of the sidewalk, the left side towards us, I would say communist. Like, and that was just a joke.
I didn't know that it was from this movie.
It was from a movie.
But like you go beyond just people walking on the wrong side of the street. If they do anything wrong,
it's always something to do with the social construct. And then, but the problem is then our kids would hear that. And now one of our kids, who will remain nameless, is always like communist. Like, that was a joke.
Communist.
That was just a joke.
And he has no idea that it's from this movie or like whatever. And it's just like, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing.
But again, and now I'm finding though that there's been a lot of immigration to our city. And I'm not really getting uppity because for a lot of people, I think in a lot of countries, it doesn't matter what side you walk on. Like you just walk wherever you can walk.
Well, especially if you're driving, like these people who drive on the other side of the street. Does that mean then they walk on the other side of the street? Like, how does that work? Yeah, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
So now I have to be a lot. So now I don't say communist anymore. And like I walk a lot and I'm constantly like walking into people and I'm just like, whatever, I'll just going to left. But anyway, I digress.
You digress. Still, we're back to, I love the word, the social construct. I just love that, instead of why don't people just follow the rules, or why don't people do it the right way, or do it my way because I'm right. But some things are very upsetting, and it would just be great if we could all just get along.
Well, just as a quick point, the reason I call it the social construct is because there was a philosopher, John Locke, who came up with a social contract theory.
Okay.
What he said is probably true, that if you're by yourself, like if you look at the natural world, life is brutish, something else in short. I can't remember the third word.
Okay.
But if you're just on your own and it's every person for themselves, it's going to be a rough life.
Yeah.
So it's just a lot easier if we come into a hypothetical contract where we just all agree there's certain things that we'll all do.
Yeah.
Even though we could probably justify on a different moral theory doing something else.
Right.
But we'll do these things and we'll look at that as the right thing to do, because if we do that, we'll all get along. It'll make us all safer and we'll all live longer and happier and all the rest of it. I'm not saying I agree with his whole theory, but that makes some sense. Like doing those kind of things makes sense.
Yeah, like stopping at a red light, going at a green light, not crossing the street until you can, and not throwing garbage all over the place. And there's just so many things that just common sense things that we can do to help each other.
Yeah. And the one last point from one of my favorite comedies, Hot Fuzz, he actually said something that changed my thinking of speeding. Because when I go out walking around, if I'm on the sidewalk, speeding cars kind of freak me out a bit. I didn't know if I was speeding, I'd freak anyone out.
Yeah.
But he pulls somebody over and he says something to the effect that, why would you break a rule that was set up solely for the purpose of protecting people's lives and safety? Right. And I never really thought about speeding in that context before. I mean, I know it's important, but they're picking these speed because they know at this area of the city, this will save lives.
Yes.
And because of that, I'm buying into that social contract.
Yeah, I do too.
Please remember that we're not providing advice. We hope to inspire you to work towards balance, and we urge you to consult with qualified people if you need advice. The people on the show are speaking in their personal capacities. Their views expressed are their own, and don't represent the views or opinions of their outside contacts, their employers, or anyone else. We try to get things right, but we can't guarantee everything we say is correct, or that the things we talk about will work for you. Let's be well together, and let's be sure to do that in a safe way. It is sign-off time. It's John here with Elise and Sheila.
Hello.
Hello.
I think I'm going to talk about being Mr. Checklist. I'm like the Mr. To-Do list. I've always got my to-do list going. And lately, every weekend is very similar. I sit down to have a coffee and I grab a scrap piece of paper and I start writing stuff down I want to do on Saturday. And then the same thing on Sunday. And it was kind of crazy this weekend. It was just like checklist. But it's also interesting that it's not always the big things that affect wellness. And so 2 jobs I was working on this weekend that I finally got to after a long time. One of them, we had a faucet by the sink and it's been leaking for about a month. And it's just a little bit of water and it doesn't leak in a place that causes a problem. It was just on the countertop. But every time I looked at it, I thought, oh, Sheila's probably going like, we got to get this fixed. But she didn't say anything. Got that fixed. That was good. And also we have a bunch of boxes in our downstairs basement back room that for years I've been thinking, I got to get to those. I got to start getting rid of stuff. Which includes dumping stuff in Elise where she lives. But
yeah, because there's a bunch of stuff that is the kids' stuff. And
right.
It's been there for ever since we've been here. So
I started pulling stuff out and we're slowly going through, and hopefully within about a month, we'll have a very clean back room. So little things helping the wellness. How are you doing, Elise?
I'm doing well. It's been another relaxing summer week. We didn't get up to much, but something we're starting to do is collecting things for the baby and trying to figure out what we need and how we want to go about getting it, whether we want to get it used or whether we want to put it on a registry. And there's just so much stuff out there now that I've started looking. My Instagram reels have changed to promote baby products. There's so many products out there. And I wonder if they're really necessary, but they really push them. You know, people saying they use them with their newborns every day. So just trying to figure out what we need, how we're going to get them. And we had some really generous friends who donated a lot of stuff to us. So we're feeling really grateful for that.
I'm all about keep it simple, stupid at first. Like you'll just be like trying to keep awake and not fall asleep because you're tired all the time. But maybe start with the basics, and then once you have the baby, then decide what fancy stuff you want.
Exactly. That's what we're going for. And we're really lucky that people have been super generous. And I feel like already we have so many toys. We don't need any more toys.
Yeah, because the problem with babies especially is they grow out of things so quickly that they barely use them, so that people want other babies to use them because they're barely used or didn't even get to be used at all.
Exactly. And it's so funny how quick people are willing to give me things.
Yeah.
Which just tells me that it kind of clutters your house and you're like, oh, you can use this. This is great.
Yeah.
Well,
we're feeling really grateful.
We're literally sitting beside something that we're going to bring up to you that is really, really important, actually, a rocking chair.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Like it's amazing how that can help a lot. Anyway, I digress.
How about you, Sheila? What's going on with you?
Well, I had a great work week. Everything was normal. And I went in to work on Tuesday to do a catering gig. And it was for the Liberal Party. And so we do a lot of that kind of stuff for different parties and different events.
Did you know it was for the Liberal Party when you went in?
Yep. When you walk in, they had,
when you got called into work.
No, I didn't know it was the Liberal Party before I got there. When I got there, you see the banners and all their stuff. And so I'm like, okay, and I know what it is and who we're dealing with. And then some of the constituents and the MPs I did recognize. I've seen them and, so that was really cool. But in walks Justin Trudeau.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Just me talking to the Prime Minister of the country,
Yeah, and he came and said hi. He was very personable and very energetic. And that was really cool. Like, how often or if ever do you think that you're actually going to be able to shake the Prime Minister's hand? And, so that was really cool. And I actually got a picture with him. So that was fun. That was my big news this week.
Politics aside, it's really cool. It's historic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I saw the picture and I'm like, do I have to go down there and be like, hey, stop hitting on my wife?
No. What did you actually say, John? I sent John a picture. Like I sent John the picture.
Yes. What I actually said was, did you ask him if he'll be on the podcast?
I was like,
Valid.
Oh shoot, I forgot. I could have interviewed him right there. Hey, here's your beer. And by the way, let's talk.
I'm only like a 3-minute drive.
Yeah, come on over.
That did not happen.
That did not happen. Well, thank you very much for joining us this week. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and we will see you soon. That is it for today's show. Please try and make wellness a priority.
You deserve it.
If you feel the need to talk to someone or ask for help, please do that.
Accept yourself for the person you are.
So long.
Adieu.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Goodbye.